Okay then, thank you so much, Tom. Yes, and for anyone who doesn't know me, I am Head of History at a British curriculum school in Abu Dhabi, the British School Al Khabaira. But I'm really pleased we've got people from North Wales here because that's where I'm originally from and I taught there for 6 years. So I have already published a book about retrieval practice, the Pink Book, but I feel that as a profession, we've embraced retrieval practice, a lot of us, and we're ready to move that conversation forward. So today is a mixture of elements from my first retrieval practice book and my new retrieval practice book that will be out in January. So it's really exciting. So the session we'll cover today, sorry, I'm having a few issues, there we go. It basically be in 3 elements. The first bit, why should we be embracing retrieval practice? And I'm sure you probably are, especially if you're here today, but it's not just about us, it's everyone in our school community, students and parents, everyone around me where I work, my colleagues. I'm always spreading the word about retrieval practice. And this is something that I'm really passionate about and I want everyone to embrace it as I do. Then, once we've talked about that, we'll look at how can we actually implement and embed retrieval practice within the classroom, and I'll be offering lots of practical classroom ideas and strategies, but also think about how we can make retrieval practice part of our bigger picture curriculum as well. And then finally, I'll be ending with some do's and don'ts, some myths and mistakes, and some top tips about retrieval practice. But obviously, Tom spoke about retrieval practice and Oliver today, and you'll hear about it tomorrow. So it is a really important aspect that will link in with all of these masterclasses. I'm going to delve deep just into retrieval practice. So, a good starting point for me is always the work of Professor Robert Bjork, and Dylan Willen describes him as the world-leading expert on memory. And I absolutely love this quote when it comes to thinking about retrieval practice. Using your memory shapes your memory. Using your memory changes your memory, because we know that every time we retrieve information from our long-term memory, information that is already there, that it changes that information. So it should be easier and quicker and stronger to retrieve in the future. And that's why we keep retrieving it, hence the retrieval practice element of it. So we are looking at retrieval practice as a learning strategy, not an assessment strategy. And that's probably why the terminology's moved away from the testing effect, which you will see in a lot of academic research and literature, to this term that is now really sort of hot at the moment, but it's not a fad, even though it's a hot term, and that is retrieval practice. So, as well as introducing retrieval practice, I'm sure you've got a really solid understanding of it, but it's really difficult when I do talk about retrieval practice to schools, because some schools are really well aware of retrieval practice, they've been using it for years, others are quite new to it. So as a classroom teacher, I find this model of the learning process really helpful, and it is building on what Tom and Oliver spoke about today. And this first stage, and by the way, this is from Arthur Melton, this was from 1963, and I wish I'd have had this model in 2010 when I started teaching. But this was the stage that I tended to focus on a lot and prioritise in the early years of my career. And of course, we know that paying attention, being engaged, encoding that information is absolutely essential, but it's only one part of the learning process. So I would be focusing on the engagement, but we all know that engagement can be a poor proxy for learning. Just because students are engaged and they're busy and they may be paying attention doesn't mean that they are learning, because we need to look at the other stages in the process. And then we have the storage aspect. Again, I've been reading a lot about the work by Bjork and his wife, Elizabeth Bjork, of the new theory of disuse from the 90s. And we basically have retrieval storage and storage strength. So the storage strength is how well secure and embedded the information is in memory once it has been encoded. And then the retrieval strength is how quick and easily that information can be accessed, Robert Bjork says, how retrievable is it? So sometimes there is information in our long-term memory that we can't seem to access. And it doesn't mean that it's not there. That's where that phrase, it's on the tip of my tongue. You've probably all been in that situation in a quiz or just any sort of day-to-day life where it's really frustrating. And that's obviously because of the storage strength is low or the retrieval strength, you can't recall it quickly. So it's important to remember that with our students when they are carrying out a retrieval activity, to not just assume that if they can't answer the question correctly, that it hasn't actually been encoded and transferred to long-term memory. It's just those aspects in terms of the storage. So then finally, we do have the retrieval aspect. So it's not just about focusing on getting the information into students' minds, but also getting it out. Because actually, what is the point in having information in long-term memory if we can't access it when we need to? And we don't want to be thinking and have it on the tip of our tongue. We want to be able to access it confidently and quickly when we need it. So that's the stage in the learning process that I will be focusing on today. But I wanted to start off with that to just say, look, this is only one stage. We can't just skip to retrieval. We've actually got to do the other stages and be aware of the other stages first. So I think there's two key reasons why we really should embrace retrieval practice. And this is the in-action, research-informed masterclass. So the fact that you're engaging with this, you are an evidence-informed teacher, probably working at an evidence-informed school. And that's one of the reasons why we should fully embrace it. The research is really overwhelming. And I've read a lot of academic research as a teacher, but also as writing my books. There's research that dates back over 100 years with the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve in 1885. And then there's research that I'll talk about in 2020. I'm also aware of future research projects happening to learn more about retrieval practice. The research really is positively overwhelming. There are gaps and there are things that research can't tell us. It won't give us all the answers. But there's so much of it in terms of retrieval practice that we really shouldn't ignore it. But that's not the reason why I'm so passionate about retrieval practice. The reason I'm so passionate about it is because of my own classroom experience. I embraced retrieval practice and I remember learning about the term and thinking, actually, I haven't really been using this effectively in my lessons. I would ask, what did we do last lesson? But the focus of the starter activity was to excite and engage, and it was never about recall. And we could easily go weeks or even months without revisiting content. So when I embraced it as a teacher, as a middle leader, it transformed my teaching practice. Results were incredible. A class that I took from year 10 to year 11, where we were regularly using spaced retrieval practice, as well as lots of other factors, and as well as the class embracing it as well. They felt confident. I felt the most confident I'd felt in my career. I did feel it had a positive impact on my workload. And being an evidence-informed teacher, I feel it makes me a more efficient teacher, and I feel that it makes teaching more enjoyable. And it just keeps motivating me to keep learning and to keep reflecting and to keep striving to be better. And there's a lot more evidence for me to engage with and a lot more for me to get to grips with, but we combine that with our teacher experience. So the general benefits of retrieval practice, I usually base this on a research paper, Megan Sumeraki, Jeffrey Karpicki, big names in terms of academic research with retrieval. I found it a little bit of a lengthy paper. I've managed to summarize it in 4 bullet points, but these are what I think are the key benefits of retrieval practice. And the first one I've already said, we know it works, we know it's effective, we have to embrace it, it's so powerful. This is really powerful, a benefit, is the fact that it identifies gaps in knowledge. That's useful for the student, for them to have this awareness. It's really helpful for us as teachers. It can guide our questioning, our future planning, our future retrieval activities as well. And it's really useful for parents. And I will be talking quite a lot about parents today and how we can get them really involved in supporting their children with retrieval practice outside of school. Also, it can lead to better transfer and organisation of knowledge. And I'll touch upon this later because Pooja K. Agarwal, another cognitive scientist, has done a lot of work on this. And the ability to transfer knowledge and information from one setting and scenario, environment to another, that really is like the holy grail of learning, isn't it? It's not about, retrieval practice isn't about regurgitating key facts, but retrieval practice plays a key role in the ability to be able to transfer knowledge and recall it when we need it. And then also this links in with what I've already mentioned about my confidence. There's research on this, not a lot, not a huge amount of research, but the research that was carried out in North America showed that the students who had used retrieval practice in comparison to other strategies were more confident, and it reduced their anxiety when it came to high stakes formal types of exams. And my experience as a teacher and form tutor would back this up as well. So actually, we need to be looking at retrieval practice from a pastoral point of view, as well as an academic point of view. Now I'm going to look very specifically at the benefits for different types of learners in our classrooms. And the question that I've been asked so many times is, does retrieval practice work as well for boys, or how can I get boys engaged in retrieval practice? Not a lot of research out there. There is a paper that was carried out in Canada about retrieval practice and gender, but I contacted the authors of Boys Don't Try, Matt Pinkett, Mark Roberts. It's a wonderful book. That book is just not specific to retrieval practice, but the gender gap in general. Really highly recommend that. And basically, in terms of gender, no cognitive differences. We should be using retrieval practice with boys and girls. The difference is where the attitude lies and how boys can be reluctant to embrace. And that's what that research paper from Canada said, that boys were less willing to embrace and use retrieval and space practice. And when I share that with teachers, a lot of teachers say, I didn't need the research to tell me that. I already knew that. But that's fine. Sometimes the research just does confirm and does agree. Sometimes it challenges our thinking. Also with boys, and Craig Barton's carried out a lot of excellent research. He's got a course on retrieval practice, and there was a big confidence gap with boys overestimating their ability, boys thinking they'd actually performed better in quizzes than they actually had in comparison to the girls. So is there a connection here? Is it that the girls are lacking the confidence, therefore they're more likely to use retrieval practice, and the boys are quite confident that they don't perhaps feel they need to, whereas they should? I'm not suggesting retrieval practice is the solution for closing the gender gap in schools, but it is a solution. And we really do need to encourage boys and girls, but have this awareness that boys are not embracing retrieval practice as much, and really try and encourage them to do that. Now, Mark Roberts, one of the authors of that book, has got a book coming out next year about boys and revision. And he's putting forward the argument that even if boys know that retrieval practice is effective, they still won't use it because they leave their revision too late. So this links in with organisation. So they know that retrieval practice, they've been told, they understand that it works better than highlighting, but because they leave it too late, they have to resort to cramming and ineffective strategies. So there's lots of things for us to be aware of in terms of gender. Ultimately, use it with boys and girls, but as I've said, a few pointers there to be mindful of. Another question I get a lot is about ages, and I know this masterclass, we've got primary and secondary teachers here. And another myth about retrieval practice is that we use it just with exam classes to prepare them. That's not true. We can use retrieval practice with learners of all ages. it really is a strategy for lifelong learning. I use it as a teacher when I'm trying to enhance and develop my subject knowledge. And I didn't use it for years, actually. I was highlighting and rereading, and then I had a light bulb moment where I realised I should really practice what I preach here. So I use it as an adult. Lots of the research does tend to focus on university and older students, but there has been research carried out into elementary and primary school students. So whilst we should use retrieval practice with learners of all ages, there are some things that we should do differently. So younger students will require more support, guidance, still that they have to generate an answer, still retrieval, but we can provide scaffolding and prompts. And I've got lots of examples that I will share with you today. Free recall, where there's no support, is harder, but actually if you've used quite a lot of retrieval practice with the students and they're quite confident in terms of their knowledge and recall, then we can be taking away the prompts and the scaffolding, because we should be providing that challenge for all. Older exam classes, again, I use a variety of strategies with older classes and with Key Stage 3, and I have experience teaching primary as well. But we should probably encourage more free recall with older students, because we are preparing our students for exams when they're of those ages. And if we give them too much support, and then when it comes to a high stakes situation, they're not as confident, as familiar, because they've had all that taken away from them. So we should be providing lots of free recall and opportunities that are low stakes, but do have a semblance to the exam questions as well. Also, this is something where I think I've been far too hasty in the past in terms of answering this question. I said, yes, retrieval practice works for learners of all abilities. And then I've had conversations with people who really are experts, and listening to Oliver and how he was a head teacher at a special school with learners with learning difficulties. Actually, they will talk to you and give you real unique insight. And I spoke to Jules Dolby, and she was brilliant. And she said, yes, she said retrieval practice works, but you do have to do it differently. For example, it's a low stakes quizzing tool, but not all learners see retrieval practice that way. They can still find it quite stressful and high stakes. So there are things that we can do and tasks that we can design to just to make it more low stakes and to take that element of stress away. And another thing that we can do is remove question timers. So if you use quizzes, it has the option for a question timer, which can be suitable for some students, but actually other students, they need longer to read the question. The question timer adds a sense of pressure and high stakes. So it's just simply better to remove that. And also in the encoding stages, and I know Tom has talked about this and he will tomorrow, Rosenshine, Nuttall, there's lots of literature that suggests students need at least 3 exposures to material, but actually there are students who will need much more exposure to material before they are quizzed and tested. So that's, again, something for us to be mindful of. There was a research paper published this year. I think this is free to access and read, and it's not too long. And it was basically saying older students with ADHD responded well, just as well to retrieval practice as students without ADHD. More able students, and we can offer them opportunities for free recall because that is more challenging, it is more effortful, therefore it's more effective. But we have to remember that we should provide challenge for all. And actually sometimes when we provide a free recall opportunity, people as students can surprise us. So don't just limit the free recall to those gifted, more able. And then finally, all subjects. So people do say to me, does it really work in my subject? My subject's different. Well, yes, it does. The research tends to focus on maths and science, but I'm a history teacher. It lends itself incredibly well to my subject. I've taught MFL, politics, RE, drama, geography. I've taught a lot of subjects, and I could see how retrieval practice works in all of those subjects. And in my new book that's out in January, there's a whole chapter, and I feel really cheeky because I haven't written this chapter, a whole chapter dedicated to retrieval practice in different subjects, where I've asked Mark Enser, who's doing the masterclass tomorrow, he writes about what retrieval practice looks like in geography, and other teachers have written about what it looks like in music and PE. And that's great for individual subjects, but also senior leaders who line manage subjects outside of their specialism. I think that will be really useful and helpful as well. So what we need to be asking now is, what does retrieval practice look like in our subject? Or if you are primary, you could be asking that question about what does it look like in subjects or within your phase and age group. And I attended a webinar about history and psychology, and it was cognitive psychology within the subject of history. And I remember thinking, this is amazing. We're now getting really familiar with cognitive psychology, that we can start to apply it specifically in subjects. And I think that's how it will go in the future. It will be Rosenshine within geography and Rosenshine in maths. And I'm already starting to see that. So we can, in departments, ask this question: what does it look like? We need to work together within our departments. And Oliver spoke about David Goodwin, on who he's working with. And David has collaborated with geography teachers from the geography teacher community on Twitter. And they've created a bank of retrieval roulettes where they've all basically said what their areas of interest and expertise are. And then they've designed questions and shared them. So not only are they sharing the workload, but this is really, really useful for retrieval practice, to collaborate with others when it comes to question design. So I would love to do the same within history, within the history community. I think that would be fantastic. Also, retrieval practice is just one of many strategies. Obviously, Oliver spoke about dual coding. That's another research-informed strategy. What does retrieval practice look like with those in your subject? For example, I do write about interleaving, and interleaving is an effective strategy. But I don't think, and there's other history teachers and heads of history, Hugh Richards agrees with me, that interleaving works particularly well in history, because we have an element of chronology to our curriculum. And I will teach for year 10, for example, Nazi Germany as one topic and the Cold War as another. And can you imagine mixing that up? It would be really confusing chronologically. So I don't use interleaving within my subject, but I do promote interleaving. So it's about thinking about what works within the context. Dual coding, timelines, lots of things work really well within my subject. So it's about looking at these strategies. Can we apply it? So I'm really lucky that actually I've got Robert and Elizabeth Bjork there. I'm such a fangirl. I've actually dedicated the second book to them. And what I decided to do was contact academic researchers and ask them this question: what is it you think that teachers should know about retrieval practice? Because there's been this gap between academic research and the classroom, and the gap is closing thanks to Research Ed, thanks to the books that have been written, events like this. So we are coming together, academics and teachers. It's taken a while, and actually Robert and Elizabeth York have spoken about their frustration about how they've got this research and evidence and teachers are not applying it. So I'm going to drop a few names here, but I asked John Hattie, I asked Dylan Willem, I asked Professor Henry Roediger, and I asked them this question: what do teachers need to know? And I'm going to share some of the answers with you today because I think they're just so insightful. And the Bjorks actually wrote quite a lot, but this is just a little golden nugget. This was from Robert Bjork. He said about the more difficult the act of retrieval, providing it succeeds, the larger the benefits. This really does link in with their work with desirable difficulties and not shying away from challenge, but getting the level of challenge desirable. So it's not too easy, but it's not too difficult. What we can do is combine retrieval success with retrieval challenge. So an analogy I like to use is the video gamer analogy. And I don't even have an Xbox or a PlayStation, but I know how it works. And level 1 will start off easy. We all know that. And it gives the gamer that taste of success. Level 1, they've passed it. They've got the success, they've got the confidence, they'll keep going, they've got the motivation. And the level of challenge will increase, rightly so, because if it doesn't get harder, it would just be boring. And if it was the same as level 1, yes, they'd keep going, but they would be disengaged at some point. But if all of a sudden level 2 became impossible and ridiculously difficult, the gamer would also give up as well. So, and I'm not saying that we should design questions based on Xbox games, but they have got a point when it comes to desirable difficulties. So we can include some questions that will perhaps guarantee retrieval success, but as long as we ensure that we are providing opportunities that will really make students think, that will be really effortful. And it will be hard because learning is hard and learning is challenging and difficult. But that's what the Bjorks are saying. In the long term, we'll see the benefits of retrieval practice. I spoke to Paul Kirshner. He's an author, he's an academic, he's big on Twitter, he speaks at Research Ed. This was an amazing conversation that I had with him. And he said, actually, I think this question's quite easy. Some people said, oh, that's a very difficult question to answer. And his answer was very different. He said, students won't take our word for it. They have to experience the effects of retrieval practice for themselves. And I thought he's absolutely right. I keep telling students how it works, the research says this, and I get frustrated. Why aren't students listening to me? Why are they still highlighting? But actually, the class I spoke about when I had them for 2 years at GCSE and they embraced it, when it came to A-level, I didn't need to convince them. They were using retrieval practice because they'd seen that it helped them, it boosted their confidence, it gave them great results. So we've got to do this with students. They won't just take our word for it, they've got to see it for themselves, to see it, to believe it. And Pooja Agarwal, I also spoke to her. She's got a fantastic website, retrievalpractice.org. And she wrote in my book about transfer and about actually the ability to be able to transfer different material. It does rely on knowledge being secure and knowledge that's secure there that has been regularly retrieved, and the storage and the retrieval strength is high. So that's really important as well. So yeah, I absolutely loved that. I was in my element, such a geek, asking these, what is it teachers need to know? And I think that's really good that we are working together. So in terms of retrieval practice, the teacher triangle in school, everyone plays a really important role, not just the classroom teachers. I am head of history. As a middle leader, I have a responsibility to support the staff in my department in terms of the implementation, sharing good practice, but also senior leaders. And the senior leaders at my school are a great example of this. And we have 4 teaching and learning priorities. Cognitive science is one of them. It has been for 3 years. They're not going to change it every year because it takes time. And they say that we should do the same but better. And with COVID, it's been the same, but in a different context. And I wanted to share this quote from Sam Strickland, who's a principal at Dustin School, an author of 2 amazing books, fantastic leader that I admire a lot because he's really interested in retrieval practice and he gets it. It's really powerful and it's really effective. And this is something that he wants to see when he's very visible in his school and he's walking around, and he understands the research about it, and he understands that retrieval practice, it has to come from the top. When I first started engaging with retrieval practice, most of my colleagues hadn't heard about it. Senior leadership were not promoting evidence, and this is at a previous school, evidence-informed strategies, and it made my job as a classroom teacher harder because I was trying to promote retrieval practice, but then in other lessons and the messages from the top were very different. So in that triangle, we're all important, we all have a role to play. But within the school community, in the teacher triangle, we need to be involving the students and the parents. And this is a quote from my book, Patrice Bain's in it, but she's written a book all about powerful teaching and how we can support parents, how we can share the research with them. And what I have created is a really sort of user-friendly study guide for students and parents that explains retrieval practice, space practice, interleaving, elaboration, dual coding, and some other strategies. And it's for students and parents, and I've shared it with Tom, and you can all have a copy of it. I created it for my school, for the students and the parents, and the feedback has been amazing. There's summaries. It's really, as I said, user-friendly. It's really helpful, I think. Well, that's what the feedback says. And I removed the school branding so you can share this with your school community. So when it comes to retrieval practice, to really reap all of those benefits, not only do we need to embrace it, but students and parents and the wider community. Do you parents at your school know what retrieval practice is? Do you talk to them about it? Is it part of the language of learning? I will talk about retrieval practice in parents' evening. I will include it in written reports. It really has become part of our whole school community culture. So I asked the academics, what do teachers need to know? But then I thought, what do students and parents need to know? What should they know about retrieval practice? And I think, and the key word is basic here, I've read a lot of books about cognitive psychology, but a basic introduction and background about why it works. Probably Dunlosky's Strengthening the Student Toolkit. Tom has got a fantastic blog post with research summaries, and Dunlosky's on there. It's a free PDF. I've shared the link with students and parents. It's really easy to read and straightforward. That is a good starting point. Then we also need to explain the benefits, really get them on board and say why it works, about identifying the gaps in knowledge, how it can improve their results overall, reduce their stress and anxiety, boost their confidence. They need to know about these benefits, not just us, the teachers and leaders. They also need to know what retrieval strategies to use. So parents will need to know exactly how they can help. We can model, we can give examples, we can give brain dumps and flashcards and say, these are the types of things that you can be doing. John Hutchinson's got a great video that he created for parents, and it's on YouTube, about flashcards for Year 4 students and parents and how they can be spaced out. I shared that with the parents at my school as well as a practical example. And then also they've got to know that it's not just about the testing effect, that it will identify gaps in knowledge and then they have to act on that. There's no point just doing a quiz and thinking I got 13 out of 15. What two did you get wrong? How are you going to close that gap? And linked into that, something that I created for my tutor group was a 5-step plan that, again, you can use this. Some schools have, you could adapt it. But it's not enough to just give them that. They will need lots of support. And I've said the starting point is the list. What do students need to know? This could be provided for by the teacher, an exam specification. They'll need support on how to space out their revision. They need to know which revision strategies to use. Then once they've identified the gaps in their knowledge, go back to step 3 and close those gaps. So what can you do in your department? Perhaps give the revision list, give the specific strategies. What can you do in a pastoral role? So as I said, I created this as a form tutor, and in tutor time, I've got a year 11 tutor group. So I absolutely love my role as a tutor, and I can help them with that. How can we assist parents? Give them that guide that I'm sharing with you. Share this with them, talk to them, have presentation evenings, record videos, links. There's loads of things we can do to help the parents. But how do we check that they are actually doing this? Well, we probably will be able to see through regular retrieval in lessons if they are doing this outside, because when we do, and this is something Tom spoke about, when we specify the knowledge, they're more likely to be using retrieval practice at home to prepare. But we can just say, can you show me your flashcards, and can you show me what you're doing, and have conversations? And actually, I remember that I told students about flashcards, and then when I looked at their flashcards, they had put a question and answer on each side, which I'd stressed, but I'd realized the questions were either ridiculously easy or not relevant. And I thought, oh no, they need a lot more help and a lot more guidance with it. And also, this is not an exam thing. This can be rolled across the school, across different subjects, across the curriculum as well. So heads of departments, heads of year, you can be collaborating on what this looks like. But as teachers then, we're looking at how we can embed this. How can we embed retrieval practice across the curriculum? Now, curriculum design is complex, it's ongoing. I've put Kat Howard and Claire Hill's book there because it's wonderful. I've not long finished reading it. I would highly recommend that. I'm recommending a lot of books, I'm aware. But a good starting point is this. What is it our students really need to know? And if you have created a knowledge organizer or you've had these discussions about your curriculum, you've probably already asked this question in terms of content, vocabulary, and so on. Then you can design your retrieval practice questions around that. Also, have a range of low effort, high impact strategies. And I'm going to share some with you today. Low effort for you as a teacher. They won't take you hours of cutting and gluing and laminating. They're good for you workload wise, but they have a high impact on the student learning. So you've got a bank of these resources and activities that you can go to, that you can adapt and embed across the curriculum. Make time for it. Avoid rushing retrieval practice, and I'm going to talk a lot about this because I think a big mistake with retrieval practice is just being to use it as a 5-minute starter activity. If Dunlowski rates it as one of the top 2 alongside space practice, most effective strategies, why would we only dedicate 5 minutes in a lesson to it? It's about getting that balance right, about not letting the retrieval activity hijack your lesson and make you feel that you're getting behind with content, but it is about making enough time for retrieval and for reflection and feedback as well. And then, as we always would with curriculum and lessons, we just continually reflect and review and adapt. So, different types of retrieval. I'm going to now look at in the classroom. We've got recognition. So this is what multiple choice questions where students have to select and identify the answer. Lots of pros and cons here with multiple choice questions, lots of potential for guesswork, but there are some strategies we can use to try and avoid that. Cued recall, retrieval with the support that I said that younger students will respond well to. Free recall, no support. And also it can be verbal or written. And people say, which one should I use? My answer would be use them all. And I know Tom Sherrington promotes this as well. He says, I've stolen his phrase, vary the retrieval diet, and mix it up, but have different types of retrieval. And actually, the verbal retrieval is really interesting because sometimes some of our students, and I found this working in an international context, so I work with students whose first language isn't English, and actually, verbally, they were able to retrieve information quickly and confidently. But if I'd have asked them to do that in a written task, they would have struggled because they were struggling with the elements of written communication. So hence, mix it up with all of those different techniques. So multiple choice questions. I'm just going to share a few examples. This is a history one about a key term that students need to know, conscription. And we've got 3 options and I don't know yet. Now, the reason I put I don't know yet, and I really like this, is I've read this in research, I've read other teachers who use this, is that's to avoid the guesswork. If we're using retrieval practice to identify gaps in the knowledge, then we can encourage students to put this down, because then that's useful for them, instead of just randomly going, I'm going to go green, or apparently go with C if you're not sure. That's what I've heard, which is ridiculous. But I don't know yet is good for the students to be honest and reflective and be aware of the gaps in their knowledge. And it's also helpful for us as a teacher. But then we've got some men volunteering to fight. That's enlisting, another word they need to know. Forced to fight with conscription. Against fighting, conscientious objectors. The other options need to be plausible. I see so many multiple choice questions online where one option is so obviously incorrect. Another option is a comedy answer. And there's times where I've looked at quizzes, which are, say, like physics, where my knowledge isn't great. I thought I could answer that. And it's not my knowledge from years ago. It's just because the other options are so absurd. So they really do need to be, as I said, plausible options. And this is a question that I took from another teacher, where the options were ridiculous and anyone could have got it right. You didn't need knowledge about Weimar Germany. But Kaiser Wilhelm was the emperor before there was a president of the Weimar Republic. Friedrich Ebert is the correct answer. Hindenburg was president, but not the first president. So again, it's that precise, specific knowledge. And it's making a multiple choice question challenging, because the idea of recognizing an answer seems easy, but actually they can be challenging. To design a multiple choice question with options is actually not as easy as you think. That's why it's good to collaborate with others. Ask others in your department, what do they think? Ask others outside in your subject communities. It really is good to collaborate. So the picture prompts now, Oliver and Tom said sticking an icon on something isn't dual coding. This isn't me saying I'm doing dual coding. Basically, the idea for this came from year 8, where I would put up a portrait of Henry VIII and say, write down everything you can remember about Henry VIII. And I would be very disappointed with their responses. They would describe the portrait. They would say, oh, he was fat and he was overweight and he was a king and he's dead. And I was just, these are ridiculous points. Or he had 6 wives. And I thought, we've had lessons that have gone far beyond that. So their answers would be very basic. So I thought, they're quite young. I wanted them to write about the break with Rome, but I never specifically told them that. I just said, write down what you can about Henry VIII. I will take responsibility. So instead, they still have to remember, but the icons are linked to something specific. So we've got the Pope, we've got the money linked to the dissolution of the monasteries, we've got the Church of England. And someone once said to me, how do you know these retrieval practice strategies work? Well, for this strategy, the year 8 class, the quality of their answers, just by being a little bit more specific, just by providing prompts, improved dramatically. And the other example there, that was the Treaty of Versailles, that's a GCSE class. So it just goes to show that we can provide different learners. And that's because I did the icons there, because when I was asking students to write about the Treaty of Versailles, sometimes they were writing about, oh, it took place, the Versailles Palace is outside of Paris. And I was thinking, no, I really need you to focus your knowledge on the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So I can adapt a retrieval activity to guide them what I want them to recall specifically. And the same idea here, the Treaty of Versailles, but with prompts that are key terms now. And everyone should be able to use the term Versailles in their answer. But actually the gold key terms, can they recall what Alice Lorraine and the League of Nations has got to do with it? But everyone has the opportunity to. That is for the whole class. I would put that up on the board. And again, the quality of their answers were better than just saying, write down what you can remember, because there was that little bit more guidance, but they've still got to retrieve information, generate it. If they don't know what Alice Lorraine has got to do with it, then they can't really just stick that in their answer. They've got to still put in the effort. So I really like the Go for Gold activity. I use that a lot, especially if we're looking at tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary. Here's an activity that's been quite popular. I shared cops and robbers. Just write down from memory what you can in one column and then go around. At first, I noticed they would all sort of go to the clever one in the class and be like, what have you got? What have you got? And the idea of stealing information from peers is it could be what didn't you recall, or you didn't have time. And we should have information in 2 columns. And that might be a little bit difficult now with COVID, but there are digital versions or a collaborative Google Doc. And then Emily Fuller-Runshow adapted that for her younger students at Key Stage 3, because again, found lots of primary school have used cops and robbers, and just having the little subheadings, write what you can about Victorian London, find what someone else has written about Victorian London. So again, you could do a huge recall with the prompts, and then a few weeks later, take the prompts away. And then do the other cops and robbers activity. So it is all about adapting and having that variety. And the brain dump is the most easy activity for a teacher, where you say, write down what you can about this topic. And there are times where this is suitable. I use this with older classes. The example I gave you of Henry VIII with year 8, where I said, write down what you can from memory. And they just wrote he had 6 wives, he chopped their heads off, really just vague, frustrating answers. I could give that to my A-level class studying the Tudors, and they would write sophisticated answers, and that would be good. So brain dump, you could, pen and paper is all you need, low effort, low cost, or device. We're using Chromebooks at the moment. Really simple, straightforward. It's harder, it's challenging, it's more effortful, but what Bjork says, it will reap more benefits in the long term. So a question, should we use exam questions as a retrieval activity? Because retrieval is meant to be low stakes. I would argue, yes, we should. This is an IGCSE question that lends itself well to sort of a 10 minutes in the lesson. We can still make it low stakes. We can have self-peer assessment. We just don't give it a specific grade. This is probably, if you are going to market, more workload heavy, but we would always do practice exam questions, so why not? The difference, it depends whether it's retrieval or not, is whether they have their notes and textbook with them. If you want them to do an exam question with support, then that's not retrieval practice, but that's okay. That it could be still in the encoding consolidation stage. And then eventually you'll take that away. So yes, I do use regular exam style questions. I just try and reinforce the nature of low stakes. This is my most popular resource. It had over 100,000 downloads. I should have charged £1 for it. It was free to download the template. And I think this is so popular just because it combines retrieval, space practice, and interleaving. Now, if you want to use this as a starter activity, that can take quite a while. I've used that activity for a whole lesson. I even set it once when I knew I had planned cover, I wouldn't be in school. I set it for a class and they had the whole lesson. I wanted them to answer as many as possible, and I wanted their answers to be detailed and thorough. And I also provided the answers for them to self-check and correct. But you could easily just reduce the amount of questions. You could have one for last lesson, one for last week, one for 2 weeks ago, one for further back. So this does, I do use this a lot. There's a blog on my website, lovetoteach87.com, where I have examples of this across a range of subjects. And as I said, you can download the template for free. Spaced retrieval. If you're familiar with Adam Boxer, he's on Twitter. I think he's great. He's written so much great stuff about retrieval practice, and he came up with an idea, retrieval roulette, which has now been turned into carousel learning, where you can upload a question bank and it will basically like space it out for you. It's brilliant. So if you're not familiar with retrieval roulette, do check that out. It's not just for science, there's all sorts of different versions out there, and as you can see from Adam's tweet, there's already banks of questions uploaded that you can use, which I love to do. I think I love to see what's already out there. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't, or sometimes I adapt it. We've got Anki flashcards, a digital flashcard tool, which will space the questions out for you. There's loads of questions. I think I read somewhere millions of questions already uploaded, or you can create your own, and you will put a few, question, answer it, and they have to verbally answer it in order for the retrieval to be effective, not just look at it and then click and go, yeah, I knew that. That's not retrieval. But then once you will put whether you got it right or wrong, and then it will use that information with its algorithm, it's very fancy, to space out the retrieval practice. And Daisy Christodoulou, she spoke about this in her Research Ed talk. She promotes it as well. It's really, really good. So as I said, use verbal retrieval practice as well. Now this placemat that I came up with, as I said, I've taught a lot of subjects. At one point, it might have even been 5. So I would design an activity like this that I could use with different year groups and different subjects. And the word generic has almost become a dirty word, and it shouldn't be. I really do emphasize the importance of subject specialism, but there are times where generic activities lend themselves really well to retrieval practice. Because of the fact that this retrieval placemat is generic, there's no clues in terms of the questions. It's a question that is free recall. By the time you start adding subject-specific information into this, we're providing more hints. And again, we don't always want to be using generic free recall. And there are times where tasks and resources should be adapted for specific subjects. But there are times where generic works, and people who are very critical of generic tasks are often not the people who are teaching. And I think if you think about our workload and how tough it is, if we could do things that are low effort and high impact, we absolutely should. Another verbal activity is a verbal brain dump. So instead of write down everything you know, talk to your partner for 2 minutes. And I loved what Tom said about only having the two people, you know, and how you could ask either one of them. You could do that. You say, right, or you could just walk around and you could listen. Students could do this on their own. They can record themselves, listen back to it. They can do this with their parents. Just say, right, you've got 2 minutes to talk about this. And then they'll be able to see how confidently they can verbally recall information. And we've got the flashcards, which lend themselves well to verbal retrieval. So lots of online learning, remote learning happening. There are so many quizzing tools out there. It's fantastic. My personal favorite is Quizzes, just because it's so flexible, adaptable. They always listen to teachers. A few years ago, I wrote that I didn't like that it was only multiple choice and no free recall. Now there's that option. The CEO got in touch with me and said, can we have a chat? And can you tell me how I can make quizzes better for teachers? I said, I love teacher perspective. I thought that's amazing. There's polls, you can insert equations, audio clips. It's superb. You can get rid of question timers. You can get rid of the leaderboard. Quizzes is my go-to. But Kahoot's great. Mentimeter is no stakes. Students don't even put their names in. So you can't actually see who has answered what, but what question, which answer it belongs to which student. But it gives you a good overview for the class. Now, my school, as I said, all the students have Chromebooks. So Google Forms are great. You can use multiple choice, free recall, lots of different strategies. But when we did, because we were in lockdown from March for the whole of that academic year, and we did end of year exams, and they were all on Google Forms. And I've noticed now that my students associate Google Forms with being high stakes. So I make sure, and I spoke to my colleagues about this, that when I'm doing low stakes retrieval, I've got lots of other options. I will use Quizzes, I will use Kahoot. When I am doing a more formal type of assessment or an in-class or end of year exam, I will use Google Forms because it is really important that we keep the low stakes element. So my golden rules when it comes to technology and retrieval practice, really simple. It should be low stakes, like I've just said. So I don't use the Google Forms for that. Workload friendly for the teacher. Quizzes, brilliant. You can teleport, you can search other teachers' quizzes. And if you don't like some of their questions, you don't have to have them. You can just teleport individual, ping them over to yours, and even edit the options as well. I love that. The digital tools like Quizzes and Kahoot mark it for you. Instant and immediate, gives you this data snapshot as well. And it must be user friendly. I know we've talked a little bit about working memory, and obviously Ollie Lovell will talk about this as well. But if it's really complex, students will be trying to navigate how to work the tool when actually we want that to be automatic so they can focus on the questions and the retrieval. So low stakes, workload friendly, and user friendly for the teacher and the student. So feedback is something that a big mistake I made in the past is not dedicating enough time to it. I would just say, look at your answers or put the answers on the board, right? Quickly check them. How did you get on? Let's move on. I really am trying to make more of a conscious effort to make more time for feedback and reflection. And retrieval practice lends itself so well to digital tools that will mark it for us, self-assessment, peer assessment. Dylan Willem said the best person to mark the test is the person who's just took the test, and that's from a book that I'm going to talk about in a moment. And we really should be embracing it more. And there's a debate, and I contacted Michael Childs because I've just finished his book, The Manuscript. This debate about feedback, should it be delayed, should it be immediate? And we were both in agreement that when it comes to retrieval practice, the immediate feedback, it makes sense. Why would you not give the feedback immediately when you can? Obviously, if it is an exam question and you're going to mark it, then it will take time. If it's an extended free recall answer, it can't be immediate. But so many retrieval quizzes and activities can provide instant and immediate feedback, because we need to see where those gaps are in the knowledge so we can close those gaps. And I love this. This is from the book where Dylan Willems said about the best person to mark a test is the person who just took the test. Carl Hendrik, Robin McPherson. And this is Dylan Willems' 4 quarters marking. And I would say 3/4 of that lends itself really well to retrieval practice. We don't need to mark it in detail. We can at times, but we wouldn't do that often. It could be self-assessed, peer-assessed. Teacher can skim it, or it can be marked by technology, and the teacher can just, again, skim that, have an overview and gain some insight. So that lends itself really, really well to retrieval practice. Here we go. Let's bust some myths, because I hear these quite a lot online and from people I know. And the first one is so frustrating. And this links in with what Tom said today. We've always done it. It's nothing new. I think there's an element of truth to that. But have I always used retrieval practice in my lessons like I do now? No. Did I have the knowledge and understanding of memory that I do now? No. So we can, even if it is something we've always done, what's to say we can't do it better and we can't reflect on it and keep doing it? So it does link in with Rosenshine. This idea, and the research is quite old, but it does frustrate me a little bit, because I wrote 2 books about retrieval practice. I've learned so much about it that I did not know when I first started teaching 10 years ago. It's stressful, kill and drill. Oh my goodness, or drill and kill. That's so not true either. As I've already said, the research says it can help reduce anxiety. It's low stakes. It's not, if we were saying, come in class, you have a test, and I will be sending your results home to your parents. That is high stakes. That is stressful. But if you say, right, we're going to do a do now activity, or we're going to do a quiz, everyone, that's totally different. So retrieval practice, it's not stressful. It shouldn't be. And it's not boring. Look at the activities I've just shown you, cops and robbers, and multiple choice questions. And obviously retrieval practice, I'm not comparing it to a pub quiz, but people enjoy going out to a quiz as a social event. There's also a lot of satisfaction in getting an answer correct. If you got an answer correct on Mastermind or University Challenge, it feels good, doesn't it? Retrieval practice can be really enjoyable. Well, I seem to think so, and my students do as well. Oh, this one, why do we need retrieval practice when we have Google? I Google things, of course. If I don't have to Google it, that's even better. Do we want a generation of students who rely too heavily on Google? Again, Daisy Christodoulou has covered this. She's written a lot about it. You do actually need substantial knowledge to be able to actually navigate Google as well. So there's a lot of this going around, and I just think it's nonsense and it's a bit of fluff, and it's not the message we should be sending out as teachers. We don't have time for retrieval practice in lessons. Make time. And I know that sounds quite harsh to say make time, but if it is one of the most effective strategies, why would we not make time for it? And actually, previously, a colleague said to me, I don't have time to use retrieval practice in my lessons. And I went and saw her teach, and I thought, actually, there are lots of opportunities where we could build retrieval practice in. And there was actually lots of times where we were gluing and sticking in, and that was wasting 10 minutes. It could be 10 minutes of recall. So we find ways to adapt and to make time for it. It's just a fad. As I said, it seems like this buzzword, but it really isn't. If it is something we've always been doing and we're still doing it, then why is that? It's because it's effective. I think it will change in recent years. We will get to the point where it's firmly embedded and we will be refining and adapting it. And we might not be talking about retrieval practice as much because we've got such a secure grasp of it. But it's definitely not a fad. It is here to stay, or it should stay. So these are some common mistakes that I've made and others. Only using it at the start of a lesson for 5 minutes and not really making more time for it, not providing the feedback. Just focusing on factual recall was something that I was very guilty of, especially within history, perhaps focusing on dates. And then now I've thought very carefully about what do students really need to know. And even with key dates, what dates should they know, do they need to know, or what don't they need to know? I'm very guilty of this as well. I focus a lot on task design And now I've got a bank of resources and activities that I'm now focusing more on question design, and that's becoming more of a priority for me. Not making the level of challenge desirable, making them far too easy or far too difficult. Not spacing retrieval, so using retrieval as a revision strategy, but cramming it right before the exam. Oh, we've got a mock exam, so we're going to do retrieval practice today, but you haven't been using it for the term. So there are ways that that's why we need to think about it across a curriculum rather than just an individual lesson. So in terms of these, can you relate to any of them? There's a whole chapter in my new book about mistakes I've made and how we can avoid them. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just keeping an eye on the time to finish off. This is based on a lot of Tom's writings about retrieval practice that's heavily influenced me and some of my own reflections. 10 top tips about when it comes to implementing and embedding retrieval practice. The first one, I really like this, and when I read this with Tom, I thought, oh, I'm so guilty of not doing this. Involving everyone. There are times when we can have a question and discussion and hands up, but if we say, right, years ago, I might have said something like, oh, what did we learn last lesson? Hands would be up. I would say, Bob, what did we learn? Bob would answer. Bob has retrieved that information. Nobody else in the class has had that opportunity. It's a wasted opportunity. So all of the tasks that are in my book and that I share involve every single member of the class. As I've said, vary the retrieval diet in terms of task design, question design, verbal, written. There's lots of ways. It doesn't have to be this mundane, repetitive activity. It lends itself really well to, it's a flexible strategy. Make that time for feedback and reflection. Make the level of challenge desirable. I can't actually see that one on my slide. Make it time efficient. Memorized it, retrieval back there. So yes, this is about the balance. So it doesn't hijack your lesson, but you dedicate enough time to it. Specify the knowledge in advance. This is what Tom's written about. Saying what will come up is not cheating, but actually it's allowing students to prepare. And it's why I also like specifying the knowledge, is it also reduces the high stakes nature of it. And if students know what's coming up and they will be quizzed and they prepare for it, that's another indirect benefit of retrieval practice. It is encouraging them to study outside of the lesson. That's not cheating. We want them all to be doing that. We want them to be learning all the time. Make retrieval practice a classroom routine if it isn't already. Even though we provide cues and prompts, make sure they generate an answer. Low effort for you as a teacher, high impact for the student, and collaborate with others. Ask others if you're not sure. Look what's already out there. Focus on the questions, not just the activity. So, and this is a jigsaw I created in terms of how can we keep getting better. We can keep learning from others, events like this, talking to colleagues, reading books, engaging with research, reflecting on our own experiences. And if we basically just keep doing all those 4 things, then we will keep learning and we will keep getting better. So what are our next steps? Well, to take away some of my ideas, hopefully, and try them out, perhaps adapt them. Or if you follow me on Twitter or you've read my books, there's lots of ideas. Work with others in your phase, year group or subjects. And then obviously keep reflecting, keep reviewing. And this is my teaching and learning jigsaw puzzle to just finish off and say that, of course, there's a lot more to teaching and learning than retrieval practice. It's one piece of a very complex puzzle. And I love how it's next to cognitive load, and that's another masterclass. And all of the other things that Tom and Mark and Zoe will be talking about. And that's something for us to think about. Where does retrieval practice fit in with all of the other masterclasses? They all beautifully link together, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow as well. So finally, recommended reading from me. Some of these books are about psychology, but embedding and implementing retrieval practice isn't just about cognitive psychology. We've got leadership books by Sam Strickland, who leads by example, who is got retrieval practice embedded really well in his school. We've got Kat Howard, who also works at the same school as him, and Claire Hill, she doesn't work there, I don't think, writing about the curriculum. We've got Patrice Bain about how we can engage parents. And of course, I haven't just included Tom and Oliver's walkthrough books because they're in the masterclass. It genuinely is brilliant. And it is about this process of actually right now, you know what it is, but walking through it, how can we implement it? How can we do it well? So there we go. Oh, how am I for time? Pretty good, I think. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, you've done really well.
You connect with me on social media to keep the conversation going, but I'm looking forward to question and answers.
So, do you want to stop your share?
Yes.
And we'll take the we'll take the chat. So I'm going to put you on full screen. So we're still recording this. I don't think people want to see me too big screen. So let's have a look at the chat. I mean, just as people are warming up to ask questions, there were a few that came through. And I think, I mean, I just want to say, first of all, I wrote it on my tweet just now that, you know, you sort of like warm up to this sort of absolute like outpouring of idea. There's, you could do it like this, you could do it like this. And that's the main thing I'm just thinking is, it is this sort of diversity of approach. And then in the nitty gritty, so because you are doing a talk which is cross-phase and cross-subject, I mean, you did have, like when you did show a specific one, like that multiple choice question. So I do think there's this interesting blend of the generic and the specific, isn't there? Like you've got the general idea, but then when it comes to the questions, there's the knowledge that you have about history, for example, just like comes through, like that's kind of where it sits. But then, I mean, you've made me think about that. I mean, I'm probably one of the people that's a bit sort of negative about genericism sometimes, but you're right. I mean, that general approach definitely has value, doesn't it? I mean, that was so interesting. Do you find that's a debate you're having though about things being, you know, like all the same technique or too generic?
I think I've been I felt almost guilty in the past for having these generic ideas, and people have questioned me within the history community, said, but you share ideas that are used in other subjects. I said, I teach other subjects as well. But then that's where your subject knowledge comes in with the question design and how you take that generic task and apply it within your subjects. But the retrieval practice placemat, Blake Harvard wrote about that, about how he liked the generic aspect of it. And that was the first time someone had ever said something positive about the word generic, because it was all like, oh no, that's generic, that's no good. But actually there can be a place for that, definitely.
Well, to me, it's a bit like, you know, check for understanding. Check for understanding is a universal teaching strategy. And so those things on that placemat are also. So let's have some questions. And one of the things that came up earlier, you really piqued people's interest with this, was this idea of the study guide. So let's say a little bit about that and where it is, and you know, because you've created this sort of, what is this? I want to see it.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And that's why I'm so lucky that my school are built. You've met, actually, haven't you, Tom, my SLT? Yeah. They had, share it out. I spent ages on it. Well, also tried to make it, I took all of Oliver's ideas about how to lay it out. I built heavily on the work of the learning scientists and their 6 strategies. And I put it basically on one page, like this is the strategy in a nutshell. And just really tried to explain it simply, clearly. It's not for teachers. It definitely, I wouldn't give that to my colleagues. I would give them links and I would say Rosenshine. I wrote it for students and their parents. And we emailed the whole of the parents a digital copy of it. And the feedback was just incredible. And then it spurred them on, because at the back, I said, if you want to find out more, you can go to the Learning Scientist website, you can go to retrievalpractice.org, you can go to Dunlosky, and lots of parents did do that. And they were quite shocked that they weren't familiar with that. And obviously they were doing the highlighting and all that sort of stuff when they were younger. So that's something now, I'm so glad Patrice Bain's written a book about parents, because I've been working so hard at first it was all about sharing it with my colleagues, and then it became, no, sharing it with the students, sharing it with the parents. So I will share that with you, Tom. It's not branded. You can literally email it out to all the parents, give it to the students, or I've shared it with other schools and they've made their own version, but
So
I don't care.
Is that something you can include in the materials we send people with the the video? Great.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, that Patrice Bain book is so interesting because she tells this whole story about how, like, she had, parents even being quite emotional about the fact that once they developed this practice for how you do retrieval practice in the home, parents who previously felt sort of inadequate, like, how do I help my child at school? Well,
Yes.
have a toolkit like, well, I can ask them quiz questions about their knowledge, which does really help them then write their essays at school. But I can do that without being an expert because the good resource helps me ask them questions. And that's something I can do beyond sort of giving them a cup of tea and sitting them down and saying, doing your homework, is I can be involved. And that type of thing I think is great. Okay. Lots of people just saying, wow, 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 amazing presentation. Let's have, here's a question. What are your thoughts on retrieval practice being included in the pastoral curriculum, like numeracy, ninja, inform time, that type of thing?
I'm currently working with heads of year on that now. And we are linking it to mental health and well-being, because obviously, well, with everything this year as well, with COVID and exams and not knowing, John Tom said, your friend has said about, one of the best things we could do is give them, a great set of exam results and to give them the confidence to do that. So actually talking about exams and effective strategies and saying that, look, if you do this and you do this now, we can reduce the high stakes, the stress, the pressure. So I definitely think it really should be combined. David Goodwin, he's come up a lot today. He's a head of year and I'm a head of department, and we want to work together as well from my academic point of view and his pastoral leadership. How can we come together and combine this? And the heads of year at my school are incredible. I go to them with stuff and say, can we do this in form time? I've delivered assemblies, but you can't just do that one-off assembly. But I want to work with younger students. I keep working with exam. I want to take it right down.
Well, I see you work in primary schools and so on. I think the key thing is, outside of a specialist teacher's presence, the students need to be able to check their answers. That's the key. So, and the teacher can't be responsible for that, and especially if they don't know the subject or they might get it wrong. So if the resource is there, a parent can use it, a form tutor can use it, and a child can use it, and you're just supporting the process of them self-checking. And do I know what I don't know? Christ, I better find that out. Okay, oh God, I better find that out. And then cue cards, whether it's flashcards or knowledge organizers, but the system is supported by it in the pastoral. I think this is all really powerful stuff. I'm just conscious of there's so many other questions. Can you talk through your class routine and how and when you put retrieval practice in then? So because I mean, I think rightly you're kind of, avoiding this idea that, and I'm going to talk about this in my session tomorrow, about the kind of the problem of the 5 minutes at the start and then the rest of the lesson doesn't require sort of generative learning. So how would you typically settle up a lesson where retrieval practice is wedded in? I
feel like I've propagated that myth because in Love to Teach, I said the best way to start a lesson is with retrieval practice. And I stand by that because it lends itself really well. Then I did a very informal observation of a colleague who used retrieval practice as a transition activity, going from sort of one, and I really liked that. And at that point, it was a bit like, oh, she's used retrieval practice in the middle of a lesson. And it's just like, there's no research that says we have to use it at a specific time. But looking at the curriculum, I do dedicate lessons to retrieval practice. Obviously, it's not something we can do a lot, but I will prepare for that and I will tell students about that. And I do find that a really valuable use of time. And I think teachers are worried about doing that. But what I would rather is with an exam class, instead of finishing, I'm not sure, a month early, so you've got a month to revise, I'd rather finish with 2 weeks to revise and I've done more retrieval lessons throughout. So that's where it's about looking at your long-term planning as well. Plan the learning, not the lesson. And I've just said, yes, we can do this. Don't be scared. We can do it. And I will use homework tasks, even if they're not retrieval, they promote retrieval. So the homework task could be, right, I would like you to do flashcards, because the problem with flashcards is students try and make them at the end of the year for all their subjects.
Yeah. I think that is a problem.
And that's, oh, it's big. It's a big problem. So
they can use them. I mean, you have to, there's a quality control thing. I think one of the things I've seen with flashcards is when they become too, is that students are sort of set off to make them, and then they've made something, and the whole process has become making the flashcard.
Yeah.
Rather,
and they don't really have time to use them, do they?
Retrieval. I mean, I've seen, in fact, when I was tidying up in our house and finding some retrieval flashcards that my son had, and they were just like pre-printed, front and back, and he had them to use. And you could say, well, students should make their own. And of course, that is a thing they can do, but only if they know how to, and they're secure in the knowledge to make them.
Yeah, that's
using them is really more important than making them, because you have to sort of revisit them and check. So anyway, I mean, that's a debate.
Well, I get asked that a lot. I've made them in the past. It's taken me a long time, but then I've got them, and that's because either you make them, or it's difficult online to find some that are specific, or you just very model them very carefully, because otherwise, just leaving them to their own devices, it's risky, isn't it? With question design's hard.
Exactly, yeah. Which is why, I mean, I'll talk about this. I'm quite glad to have seen this session now, because my one tomorrow, because some of the things I talk about tomorrow totally feed in from this. And what I'm going to focus on in the session tomorrow in the retrieval section is about making these sort of retrieval activities part and parcel of a lesson, so that you're training the students to do them when they're at home. Because if you're not modeling it, like, for example, selecting the questions, lots of people just bigging you up, to be honest. I mean, that's
I'm nervous following you and Oliver, so that's really good.
No, it is. And I think, to be honest with you, it's that sort of teacherly sense that these things need to be practical or workable, and there's variety. But also, we all know that we're going to, you need to go away and then apply it in your own subject discipline. Do you think you should, do you think students need to know the science behind retrieval practice, idea of strengthening recall through practicing retrieving? Do you think you need to understand the concept? Someone's asking this about, say, older students, or do you think you just sort of get on with it?
I do, actually. I do think there's worth in that, educating them. I put about basic knowledge, because we can, I've seen presentations that teachers have delivered to students with the Ebbinghaus curve, and I just sometimes say, I don't know, sometimes you're taking it a little bit too far, really. But I do think that background knowledge and the idea why it works, and I give the analogy about the highlighter and the actor learning his lines, and even though it's not rote learning, but an actor would not learn his lines from highlighting. He would have to rehearse and test himself until he gets to the point that he knows he can recall them from memory. So why do you think when you highlight something, it's just like that video just gone into your brain? And then they go, oh yeah. And it has to be, like Paul Kirshner said, there has to be that penny drops moment where they really do. They see it for themselves. They get it. It takes teachers sometimes a bit of time to get that penny drop moment with some of these aspects, and it is the same with students. Yeah.
I mean, I just know it, and students, for example, sometimes people say, like I'm a physics teacher, someone say, what's the point of knowing the equations of motion or something, the Suvat equations from the, as they say in maths, off by heart, when you get a formula sheet. Whereas, because when you a student and sees that, v squared equals u squared plus 2as, they see it written down, they know it's right because they know it. It's like they're referencing, they're checking, like, that's correct, or they know it's not correct because they know it. Whereas if you just rely on seeing it, you don't, if you make a mistake, you're not certain of the error. And just having the fluency to just go, blah, 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 that thing of freeing up the working memory. I mean, I think you do need to create a moments maybe where you get students to test what they can do without being helped. And when they realize they do know things, boy, does that give them a lift.
Yeah.
Someone's asking about Key Stage 1. I often find, because the curriculum is different at Key Stage 1, and I think some of the issues to do with fluency and recall at a word level, and maths number and sort of number facts can be more important than, say, factual recall at Key Stage 1, but it still can be useful. So have you particularly worked with primary Key Stage 1 to know what would be particularly useful there?
Well, I know a little bit. In my new book, I contacted John Hutchinson and I said, can you, because I did the whole, well, you've seen Tom, the whole subjects, but I wanted a primary take as well. And obviously Claire Seeley, she's brilliant. Pooja Agarwal's got a guide for retrieval practice in early years on her website, which was really interesting. Yeah, I'm not the best person to answer about that, but I do definitely believe, obviously, that there is this place for it, and I want retrieval to practice to be just become something that is a habit and a routine. I don't want to, I really look forward to the day where I'm not telling exam classes what retrieval practice is. We're not there yet.
I think the thing with Key Stage 1 is that it's to say that that's the key difference. You're not preparing them for an exam. You're preparing them to know things. So where I've seen it work well myself is where it's not like, right, okay, guys, we're going to do a quiz. It's like it's embedded into things like repeated use of words, choral chanting, paired question and answer, and rehearsal, like a lot of what you might call rehearsal of facts, knowledge, even things like times tables. But certainly, like that kind of the feeling of using words through things like recitation of poetry. So, for example, so students get used to saying, "The wicked witch had gnarled fingers and bulbous eyes," and because it's in a sort of poetry rhythm form, they learn to say those words. And so they're learning to say wicked witch, and it's got alliteration in there. And that is retrieval because they're using words that they know, but they're doing it sometimes together, sometimes on their own. And all these things are retrieval. They're not a teacher-led quiz. It's different. So I do think we need to be clear about kind of how diverse this can be.
And that question about, how do you know it works? And I said about quality of answers improved, but also with vocabulary, and that's so important with vocabulary instruction, all ages with retrieval practice. But how do you know that's working? Because they are using those words in their work. They are verbally using these words in the correct context, confidently, they're pronouncing it correctly. So you do see so many of these knock-on benefits from regular retrieval.
Yeah, I totally. In fact, one of the most, I literally eye-watering, beautiful things I've ever seen was what was a bottom set French class in year 9, and the teacher had got them to say a speech about themselves in French from memory. And she said, like, she was like weeping at the back because she said, I never believed that child would ever be able to do that. And because they'd set up this whole retrieval thing, there he was talking about himself in French. He was just like, oh my God, it's just like, you see it because you set the expectation, and there he was. And it was just fantastic. And reciting and saying things in French is retrieval. It's like knowing, this is what I know. So I think when you set up those things and you do see kids benefit, it's quite profound. Well, look, I'm going to stop there. Wow, amazing presentation. I can't wait to read Retrieval Practice 2. Even though you snuck it in before your main job, which is to write
I'm on it.
Formative assessment strategies in action. So I'm really looking forward to reading that. And I think when we come to the summer, where we will be doing another one of these sets of masterclasses, by that time, that book will be out, and will be a delight to have you back and to talk to you then again. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you for having me. Real privilege.
Yeah, and I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you so much.